All right, everybody, welcome to Theory Underground, or welcome back at this point. If you're watching this, you might be watching this during the epic marathon live stream here on February 22nd, or you're watching this when it's reposted in the future. But it's so great to have you on the show. Welcome, Chris Cutrone. How are you doing today?
Good. How's it going?
Fantastic. We wanted to talk about the value form Marxist debate. And Nance, I don't know if you are in a situation where you want to turn your camera on and be a part of this, but otherwise he's listening, and he's been a part of the Capital Mondays thing that we've been doing now for the last, well, pretty much all year. Like this year, we've been doing every Monday, or some day in the week, but we try to do it on Mondays. We do anything between 3 and 8 hours of reading, either from Capital or from what we call expansion packs, or internal or external critiques of Capital. And one of the biggest things on the radar, I guess, that we're tracking when it comes to reading this text is the question of value and the value form debates that have been going on most recently, at least in our awareness, between Michael Heinrich, and on the other side, you've got guys like Mosley and Swartz. And so we were tracking that, and we started bringing back in Koji Karatani, started looking into some Stone. And all of this is kind of just us productively procrastinating from actually doing the Capital reading. But,
Oh no.
Because we want to reread chapter 1 after having seen the Heinrich and Mosley versions of chapter 1. We want to go back to it again, because it's like, how do they come to such different conclusions from the exact same chapter?
You know what I would recommend, Dave? I'd recommend don't do the secondary literature, because it's bound up with, it's overloaded with problems from the 20th century that are kind of insoluble. And to clue into Das Kapital, the Grundrisse is there, and other writings by Marx, even the so-called pre-scientific writings, but economic and philosophic manuscripts, and then I guess the first scientific, in Althusserian terms, writing, the Poverty of Philosophy, right? And I would say that Marx does explain himself. It's not to say that it's easy. It's not. It's a little bit arch in its language. Like, Marx is a little bit of a madman. I mean, he is in the British Library, and he's kind of like chuckling to himself as he's scribbling. He is. I mean, but, and it's also 19th century kind of language, and and he's also trying to be scientific in this very strange way, meaning Hegelian science. It's got all the literary references. It's it's not an easy read, but no point confusing yourself with other stuff, right? In other words, you need to have the direct contact with it, and also you have to allow Marx to challenge you at the level of your own assumptions, meaning that you think you know what commodification is. You think you know what a commodity is. You think you know what he's talking about when he says use value and exchange value. You do not. Right? So he's starting there in a very peculiar way. And of course, it's not all there. It's not like all in chapter 1. It's not. It's just setting it up. And This is what scholars have talked about, the problem of presentation, which Marx kind of agonized over. Right, he did. So the Grundrisse starts with production. It doesn't start with the commodity form. It starts with production. And then he decides, oh no, I got to start with the commodity form. But it's a very peculiar, and it is modeled on phenomenology of spirit. The early chapters, like the sort of basic level determinations, like, okay, what are the most basic categories, the simplest categories, in that respect, the most abstract categories. But your own, like impulse is going to be, we love use value, we hate exchange value. We love the qualitative, we hate the quantitative. And, the secondary literature is not great on cutting to the chase with that, right? Which is to say, without exchange value, we wouldn't have equality and democracy. Right? So you got to watch out for the use value critique of capitalism, the romantic critique of capitalism or romantic anti-capitalism, the idea that you want to get rid of exchange value and just keep use value.
Bring back use value, right?
Right? And it's like, no, that is not the point. And also that the commodity is not like a thing, right? It's a social relation. And what that means is that it's us. We're the commodities.
Right.
Right? We're the subjects of the commodity form. We're the objects of the commodity form. We're the commodities. And so they get into all of it, like labor versus labor power versus labor time. There are levels of determination, and he unfolds them. And he doesn't only unfold them, Marx, in volume 1, but across all 3 volumes, right? So that's the other thing. I kind of feel like you have to be willing to engage all 3 volumes. You do. And there's no real textual problem with volume 2 and volume 3. There isn't. The fact that it's Engels and Kautsky, it does not matter. It really doesn't matter. Because you have to get to the point, right? So he starts with use value, exchange value. He starts with like Adam Smith. He starts with bourgeois thought, bourgeois political economy, and he ends with the manifest phenomena of industrial capitalism, which seem very far from Adam Smith. Right. So, I mean, there's a lot to say about that. He's writing in the time of the marginal utility theory arriving on the scene, when people are saying, look, labor is not the basis of value. Right. But of course, they mean something entirely different by value. They don't mean like what Marx meant. Marx meant like social value, like a social relation, a value relation. They mean economics, price, right? So there's just a lot, and I feel like, you can't put a price tag on this or that. You can't put a price tag on love. You can't put a price tag on art. You can't put a price tag on time energy. Well, no, you can and you must. You can and you must. This is our form of social justice. This is our form of social justice. It's the only one that we have, actually. The commodity. It's the only form of social justice we have. Even the reactionaries who think that they're doing something else, ultimately, everything that they're doing is based on the bourgeois social relations, labor as a commodity.
So wait,
us as subjects
to clarify,
and objects.
You're saying, for instance, no, we do have to put a price tag on it. Meaning,
yes.
Are you saying that is within capitalism the only thing that we actually can do? Or are you saying that that's what they're saying, or are you saying that that's just what people end up doing?
No, it's Marx. I mean, commodity fetishism, right? And commodity fetishism, I know that you have the psychoanalytic background. It's the first thing I tell my students. It's not a psychoanalytic fetish. It's not. It's an anthropological fetish, meaning it's our reality. It's as real, materially real, concretely materially real as the spirits are to ancient peoples and as God is for religious people. Meaning it affects our action, it affects our feeling, it affects our thinking. It is the source, and doesn't just affect, it's the source of our thinking and feeling and action, actually, in the same way the fetishes of other peoples have been. The only reason that we can see it is because it's exploding around us in capitalism. Right? So the problem is not commodity fetishism. It's not in and of itself, commodity fetishism is not the problem. The commodity form is not the problem. But we need to be aware of it because it's one side of the contradiction. Bourgeois social relations and industrial forces of production. Right? So since the Industrial Revolution, you know that.
I know it, but I get that, but I don't see where I don't get where the putting the price tag on love or time energy or any of these other things is our only form of our only way to do any kind of social justice.
Time is money, right? You know, time is money.
Yeah.
You know, time is money, and that sucks. But time is money, right? Meaning, like, I need to earn enough to pay to keep me alive.
Right.
For the time I need to take to work again, right? So that literally is, I mean, I have a very proletarian view of these things. Meaning, why do I have a job? Because someone has decided to keep me alive.
Yeah.
I'm only alive insofar as I'm useful for a certain amount of time.
Which is also, just side
That's the
note,
only
why I
reason
get
I'm alive.
this is why I get angry when people come in the chat and start saying, "Oh, you charge for your courses? You're a capitalist. What are you doing? How can you say you're anti-capitalist when you're charging for things?" And I
That
get
pays
angry
for the
because I'm like,
bills, man. Pay
I
the
want to
bills.
live. I'm trying to actually
You
survive here, Yeah.
have to eat. Yeah, I mean, it's just, I've always lived in an urban environment. I'm not going to be like foraging mushrooms or something, or hunting. Like, I need to buy my food at the store, GMO, whatever. I just hope it doesn't kill me too quickly, right?
Right.
That doesn't cause too many health problems, but that's what's keeping me alive. That's the IV drip. And I only get access to it insofar as I'm useful to people. I mean, that's just reality. And we got to do socialism out of that reality. We're not getting out of that reality to do socialism. We're doing socialism in that reality. Socialism is going to come out of that reality.
So would you then say, because I was playing with this idea the other day in this exact same kind of context, where some people who think of themselves as anti-capitalist, I mean, I'm sure they actually hate it. They kind of, yeah, I think they think they can just see through the fetish and therefore it can be disavowed or dismissed, or we can just overcome it because we don't like capitalism, so we'll just do things for free and we're past it, right? And I was thinking, like, to me, that position seems like it's the real capitalist realist position, in that it's not able to actually see a plausible way forward. It doesn't have a future. Whereas what I'm saying, I think we are in this situation
Yeah.
is we're realists about capital, but we're not capitalist realists.
Right. Well, right. No, it's tricky, right? No, I mean, the thing is I mean, that's just a different level of argument. Like the Mark Fisher
Okay.
capitalist realism argument is an argument about politics, which is specific, meaning there are no political alternatives on offer, right? And so, given that fact, do we just have to adapt to it politically? Well, hopefully not. We do now. I mean, in other words, I'm not gonna hold it against anyone if they want to vote for Biden or Trump or whatever, right? I'm not gonna be like, oh, what? No, like people do whatever. And I hope that they make, rational decisions with regard to their self-interest. And I hope it works out for them. You know what I mean? Like, I hope they make their gamble. I hope it pays off. Right. But I'm like a committed Marxist in the sense that I'm looking at things more long term and I'm thinking, okay, all this shit we've gone through for decades, for a century at least, right? Are we going to keep doing this long term? Or are we going to have any hope of getting out of it? Right. And so nothing's immediately available. There's no party to sign up for to join right now. There's not. I mean, there might be activism to do, but that would be not necessarily socialist activism. That would be activism within capitalism. It would be like a kind of liberal like activism. It would be like a kind of basic social justice, harm reduction, whatever you want to call it. People claiming their rights under the system. That's cool. And maybe even expanding their rights under the system. That's fine. But don't confuse that for the real like task, right? And so that's where we need to, I think, we've avoided this for a long time now, right? We've gotten into like the fight the right mentality. And then sometimes that flips over when people get red pilled and they're like, oh, I thought I was fighting the right, but it turns out the Democrats are really the evil, right? And they just kind of flip that way. And that's true too, but that's not like the point. So, I mean, we're talking at a fairly rarefied intellectual level. And, you're reading Marx's Capital. If you want it to speak to you personally, that's a mistake.
Yeah.
First of all, it's not, right? It's not like it's not gonna be like satisfying that way, like emotionally satisfying, like give you like, is Marx just doing this thorough condemnation of capitalism? Right? Is that what he's
No.
doing? No, right? It's a strange idea there. And then, because then, people are like, well, what did Marx get wrong? What did he get right? And do people, get the depth of the critique of Marx or something like that? They wonder whether people are taking it superficially or not. And, I think it might be about something else, meaning he thinks bourgeois political economy is what's informing the workers' movement for socialism, first of all. So critique of political economy. What is he critiquing? He's not critiquing the ideology of the capitalist class, because they don't have that. The capitalist class is not bourgeois political economy. So they don't believe in that at all. They don't believe in the labor theory of value, none of that. They don't even believe in use value, exchange value. They don't believe really in market supply and demand. They don't. The capitalists themselves, no. So who does believe in that? The working class and the workers' movement for socialism, the Chartists, like in England, and the socialists in Europe. They're the ones who believe in like labor as the basis for value in production. They have a very sophisticated view. They have Adam Smith, David Ricardo view of things. And Marx is critiquing that. He's not critiquing it because it's wrong. He's critiquing it because it can be one-sided, antinomical. Like, he's trying to do this dialectic of that, right? And showing, I guess you could say, the inadequacy of it, but also he's not offering something to replace it. Like, it's not like he's doing a better version of it or something.
Which is where it comes back to saying, this is not about if we could just figure out the right currency or way of doing distribution and exchange that would get us back our use values, right?
I forget that we're in the realm, or at least we used to be, in cryptocurrency or something, and this kind of thing. And it's like, oh man, no, like if only money were truly a commodity, as opposed to a fiat currency of the state, right?
Right. That's
if it were truly
the libertarian line,
if it was gold, right? Or if we were agreeing on it all the time through crypto, then somehow it would be more just. And it's like, no, Marx wants to understand how this stuff happened. Like, in other words, how is it that the commodity form has been destroyed by industrial production, and yet also is reproducing it, right? So is kind of recurrent. So it's, it's not like, let's restore this. Yeah, which is the right, but again, the left also. The left just wants the state to restore it. Establish social justice. Which means, that the state's going to be responsible for figuring out all the ways, right, that people's participation in society should be, equitable. Right?
So this is all coming out of basically like some solid advice for us in how we are approaching capital and our expectations, and the in your tactic, or like your overall advice is to just stick to the primary text, and I appreciate that. Now, with that said,
and be open to it.
Yeah. And I'm going to do a lot more of that, because I know that this has been productive procrastination from just doing the thing. And we also know that we're not going to get any grand solutions. Our goal is to at least get through the 3 volumes and then do it again. And so this is kind of just like an indefinite, it's just a thing we do once a week, and it's just a way of life. And it's not like a segmented class at Theory Underground. It's just its own thing. But with this value form debate that has been going on, I was racking my brain thinking, who do I know that said stuff about this? And you're the main guy who came to mind, because I was like, somewhere, once upon a time, I came across something. Someone shared it with me, perhaps, where it was you talking for 20 minutes about the value form. And I remember just going like, oh my God, you're like arguing against the labor theory of value. This was back before I was more initiated into the conversation. And so I'm wondering if maybe you could kind of set up for people like what it means for you to be a Marxist who's like against the labor theory of value, or or maybe you can kind of relate that to the
I'm not
value form
against the
debates
labor
itself.
theory of value exactly, right? So in other words, it's not as simple as that. What I would say is that
Okay.
the labor theory of value both pertains and does not pertain,
Okay.
right? So in other words, let's take it back to the beginning. So bourgeois thought, bourgeois political economy, Adam Smith. He's a moral philosopher. He's a social philosopher. He's a Rousseauian, right? So he's advocating the labor theory of value, meaning he's not just saying labor, like value is labor or labor is value. He's saying it should be. So it's an is-ought distinction. You're familiar with that, the is and the ought, the
Yeah.
dialectic of the is and the ought. So he wasn't saying labor is value. He's saying labor ought to be value. So it's emancipatory. That vision is emancipatory. But that becomes an inadequate horizon of emancipation with the Industrial Revolution. So the Industrial Revolution, there starts being a disparity between the way that we struggle for freedom in production, in capitalism, and the actual social possibilities beyond capitalism. Right? So trying to claim the true value of labor in production both motivates capitalism and kind of drives it. So the class struggle of the workers both drives industrialization and keeps it going, but it also holds it back. It's retarding. It's a constraint on the real possibilities of the general social intellect, to use a Grundrisse category, and science and technology. Right? So, revolutions, the struggle for socialism, the class struggle of the workers actually keeps capitalism going. Right? So capitalism is class struggle in that sense. And it's class struggle both formally, like when people are actually doing like collective bargaining and fighting for their rights and making demands on the state and launching movements, but it's also done like unconsciously, people voting with their feet, and that's where the kind of mystification of the market can come in, because it's kind of like, okay, because we are talking about like subsistence goods, and we are talking about, a large portion of the population that have to live through their labor. And I mean, obviously there are different levels to this. There are different levels to this. And that's why the labor theory of value is important as a starting point, but it's inadequate. And the reason it's important as a starting point is that you can't just throw it out the window, because it actually does correspond to our social reality and the discontents that we have in our social reality. Like Andrew Yang saying, what about the unpaid labor of mothers and of artists? Right? As a basis for UBI. And when he's saying, look, us tech bros are putting people out of work, and don't we owe society something? And maybe the UBI should be that. Right? Some kind of social justice. Maybe we should pay people just for existing, because after all, they are, humans are creative creatures, and we make things and we come up with things, and maybe that should be subsidized by the state, especially because people can't do it for a wage. Right? That's based on a labor theory of value, even though it's talking about paying people for not working. That still is based on that. It's still based on commodity fetishism. And that's where Marx is going. That's why he says it's theological, it's metaphysical. He means it very literally. Right? This is our theology, this is our metaphysics, and it's real. It's real. Right? God was real. The commodity is real. Labor as value is real. Capital is real. These are realities. These are not evil social conventions that are fucking us over. These are realities that come out of the way we actually live in practice on the ground, concretely. It's
Right.
constantly being generated by what we're doing all the time.
And so then your position was not labor theory of value was wrong. Your position was the point with the labor theory of value is not to get us to this position where now everyone's going to get paid fairly for their labor, right?
Right. That's both impossible and in some ways undesirable. Right. So it's not about like right or wrong could mean accurate and inaccurate. I think that we're in a post neoliberal moment. So in the neoliberal era, right, people were like, Marx is wrong because the labor theory of value is wrong. And even though they were like neo-Smithian, supposedly, they weren't really, because they were like, well, Adam Smith is wrong too, because he also has the labor theory of value. So they'd pin it on Marx, they'd pin it on Adam Smith, they'd pin it on bourgeois political economy more generally. And that's where it becomes important to understand in Marx's time, who does bourgeois political economy refer to? It does not refer to the capitalist class. And it doesn't refer to capitalist economists, because the capitalist economists are taking their leave in Marx's own time when he's writing Capital of the labor theory of value. Marginal utility theory is being formulated in the late 19th century. And then Keynesianism is also some strange thing, because it's also like beyond the labor theory of value, and yet somehow also kind of restores the labor theory of value in this roundabout way, even though Keynes doesn't intend to do that. And, so I think we have layers in history of confusion to work through, where Marx can't be just sort of parachuted into today's debates, in the way that, at least in my time, right, the kind of neoliberal free marketeer type people, the kind of people who are like, oh, well, socialism is trying to correct the economy, but it just ends up fucking over the economy, and you should just let the economy happen. Any attempt to change it policy-wise just has these unforeseen consequences, which is all true, by the way. All that is true. All of that is absolutely true. I like to point out that the welfare state, the more equitable form of capitalism, went into crisis in the 1970s, and it went into crisis for a reason, meaning that the welfare state does produce a problem of value. It does produce a value crisis, right? It doesn't look like the way we think about value crisis, the way we think about FDR New Dealism, Wall Street crash, where farmers are paid to destroy their crops to maintain the value of their produce. That's not what we're talking about, right? We're not talking about, oh, see, liberal economics doesn't work, and so you need the state to come in and fix it. The state came in and tried to fix it, and it still went into crisis in the 70s. And I don't think people have a good understanding of that. They think it's oil shock or something. I don't know what people think on the left. I don't know what people on the left think. They think it's a one-sided class war. They think it's the capitalists just one fine day decided that they wanted more profits. They don't understand that the reality of capitalism actually demanded higher rates of capital accumulation than were possible under the old system, in the same way that the liberal capitalism that FDR and the New Deal and welfare state dealt with, they were also dealing with the problem of capital accumulation. And that's where, that's why I make the plug for volume 2 and volume 3, is just to say that's the real issue. The issue is not the commodity form, the issue is capital accumulation and the value crisis that comes with capital accumulation. It's not use value, exchange value. It's not like, oh, the contradiction of capitalism is use value versus exchange value. I can't tell you how many people ultimately, even though they should know better, Marxologists who should know better, they believe that.
That's the essential contradiction.
That's the essential contradiction, and it's not. It is not, because, it would be great if we had a free interplay of a dialectical interplay of use value and exchange value. That would be wonderful. But capitalism, industrial production makes that impossible. But it also holds itself out there. It's why like anarchist mutualism, localism, like some kind of restoration of petty bourgeois, like egalitarianism, that each community should be free to do its own thing. There shouldn't be these giant corporations, and there shouldn't be these states imposing on people or pulling the rug out from under people. But the thing is, well, why does that happen? It doesn't happen because of rich capitalists and their evil intentions, their profit motive, their ruthlessness. It happens because of capital accumulation. That's why it happens. That's how it happens.
Right.
I mean, yes, you got some sociopaths who become CEOs or whatever to facilitate the process, I guess. But that's just not the problem. It's also not how we're going to change it. Right? We're not going to put in like good bureaucrats to root out all the sociopaths, because turns out the good bureaucrats are themselves as sociopathic as any capitalist CEO, as any Michael Douglas character, right? In their own way. right? So, but again, use value, exchange value is not the problem. It's not. That's why that chapter 1, it will kill you because it's this weird arch kind of discussion, and it's Hegelian, it's bizarre, and it's like, it's hard to get out the gate if that's where, that's where you start.
Right.
Chapter 1. It's hard to get out of chapter 1. You might
Yeah,
be
it
able to
is.
get to like money, right? But even that is going to be misleading, and it's going to be like a little bit trippy. I feel like people only feel that they have a solid grounding when they get to the struggle over the working day,
Yeah,
because then it's
sure.
about like exploitation, and it's like recognizable. Oh, he's talking about something. Like we didn't know what the fuck he was talking about, but now he's talking about something. And he's
Right.
talking about like history and concrete social conditions. And it's like, actually, the history and the concrete social conditions are as abstract as the commodity form is, in fact.
Yeah, and then you get into the yeah, so it's the struggle over the working day and primitive accumulation seem to be the two
Oh,
parts
primitive
everyone
accumulation, that's because people love their decolonization or whatever.
exactly. Yeah, those two parts and the capital is a vampire. Those are like the three memorable parts. Everything else is like what's
Right.
going on here, And
Mm-hmm.
so this is like the return that aims to really just work through the whole thing. But yeah, we were trying to get a bunch of uh secondary interpretations kind of on the table so that as we read, it's not just, oh, how does it seem to us? It's also what are these competing
It's politically tendentious. And what I'd say is that
interpretations?
no reading of Capital is going to solve the political problems. Meaning that obviously, people have used Das Kapital, readings of Das Kapital to justify all sorts of things politically. So it's not like, oh, we're going to avoid Stalinism through a correct reading of Das Kapital. No, right? Because this is a different order of problem. It's a different level of political judgment, right? So there are the problem of like Stalinism and the Soviet Union and this kind of thing, or China today, is not solved by a proper, correct, accurate reading of Das Kapital. It
Right.
is not, right? Because it's still left, you're still left with the problem. Like what is China supposed to do?
Right.
You know, should it devolve into corrupt warlordism? Should it be bought out by Taiwan? What should it do? Right? Das Kapital is not going to tell you any of that.
This
Right?
is this is well, so and we're not political wonks or even arguably we're not even part of the political side of YouTube in a sense because we don't care about the elections, we're not following the current affairs. The issue, so Capital is the
Mm-hmm.
sort of by understanding the debates revolving around capital and
Mm-hmm.
why say Keynes is or is not in agreement or disagreement with capital, and in which ways Ricardo and Smith were or were not in agreement with capital. Like it's like the reference against which we can then go, okay, so what is the actual field of
Mm-hmm.
the situation today? And I'm not saying we'll know what it is, but saying we'll
Mm-hmm.
know what the constitutive contradictions of that field are, right? And so, but it's also a question just of interpretation. We're curious about how it is that so many people read, or even from the Second International, how did so many people read Capital and then go, we have the socialist politics now, and we'll get back our use values, or we'll find a way that everybody can get the value for their labor,
I
or
mean, I would say that, the working class had constituted a struggle for socialism in the 19th century, in the 1800s. And they didn't need Marxism to do that. They certainly didn't need Das Kapital to do that. Right. So that existed. So Marx and Engels, Marx didn't invent socialism, didn't invent communism, didn't invent the workers' movement for socialism at all. And
right,
the anarchists are there to tell you, oh, these crazy Marxists hijacked the movement. They might be right about that. Yeah. And no, I'm not gonna toss that out the window. I'm just gonna say, you know what? I don't know if Marx and Marxism taking over the ideology of the workers' movement for socialism didn't work out too well, did it? Didn't work out too well in the end. But right. So, all bets are off with this stuff. And again, the debates now are different because the debates now are about neo-Keynesianism. And I'm afraid that, like with Michael Heinrich and with a lot of these guys, right? Postone, right? That there's a kind of a frustration and a confusion that they're kind of enacting, to use a psychoanalytic term, with respect to their own moment. So their own moment was a rebellion against the welfare state, a rebellion against Keynesianism. That's their moment. And that's not our moment. That's not our moment. Meaning the rebellion against Keynesianism succeeded. Neoliberalism happened. We've moved on. The world has moved on, right? We're not going to replay that battle. We're not going to say, oh, the 70s should have gone another way. They should have listened to Michael Heinrich and Moishe Postone instead of Milton Friedman. No, we're not refighting that battle, right? And we're also not saying, oh, the world should have listened to Rosa Luxemburg instead of FDR's people in the 1930s or something. We're not refighting these battles. So the only advantage of Marx is the strangeness of Marx. And also because he's writing from the beginning of the story, meaning he's writing in the immediate aftermath of the Industrial Revolution. And so in some way, we still live in Marx's world. Maybe we live in Marx's world more than we live in Keynes's world or Friedman's world, right? Because he's getting at things at a more general, abstract, basic level, and everything that has risen and fallen in the meantime has turned out to be more ephemeral in character. Maybe there's something more enduring about, like, the problem of, again, bourgeois right, bourgeois social relations, and industrial production. Maybe the basic contradiction remains through all this 150 years history that we've had since then.
So
where people have tried things.
With our last 16 minutes here, I wanted to I do want to give Theo and Nance and potentially Sahil, who's listening right now, but he's not in the chat. I gave him an unlisted, so he'd be able to catch up on the chat or on the our conversation and then jump in. But before I turn it over to them, I kind of want to bring it back to the conversation we were having before we were recording, because this is just something I'm dying to ask you, and I kind of already know what they're going to ask you about, and so that I want to just I want to get this one in there. So on the question of the left and your position having been now for a long time that the left is dead, and then my position being, so is it resuscitatable? Is that should that even be the goal? Should we be clearing the way for something potentially different? And I know you had said before, well, if you do this not left or right thing, you inevitably become right, and that's something that we've been thinking about. And I think maybe Nance will have a question for you on that. But my thing was going to be, to do what Marx did, or to try to approach things like Marx did today. So interesting question, because Marx did not try to resuscitate the idea of the left. The only reason he was arguably writing the manifesto in the first place with Engels was because there was a robust, dynamic, already existing, strong working class, I want to say movement, but really movements all over the place. And so, from the communist perspective, it's like, oh, we can organize all of these things together into a thing. And then from Marx and Engels' position, they're like, yeah, but what you're calling communism sucks. So here's how it could go, guys. This is a much better plan. Here's the manifesto. That's harnessing and directing something that is existing. And so we're in this situation where it doesn't exist. And that term, not only, so for the regular working class person of Marx's time, that term actually gave them hope. Today, that term makes a regular working class person without all the education and what these terms really mean and what real history was or whatever, makes them just go, averse. Let's go the other direction. I feel like that puts us in a very different situation then. So I wanted to raise that, see what you do with it, and then we'll turn it over to Q&A.
Yeah, because communism, right? So this is, again, the 20th century has traumatized us. And so, around the time that I was doing platypus, I had been teaching academically Marxism already for a few years. But at that time, I was even averse to the name socialism, because it's like, yeah, it sounds a little too collectivistic, a little bit too authoritarian, even socialism, right? Communism definitely has that. And I'll just say that Trump said something once. He said that he gets along with the president of Mexico, even though he's a socialist. And then he says sometimes he gets along better with socialists. And then he says, Bernie's crazy, he's a socialist. But he said, other Democrats are evil. They're not socialists, they're communists.
Did he really say that?
He said Kamala Harris is a communist. What did he mean by that? He meant like a ruthless bureaucratic apparatchik, meaning Bernie represents something of principle that he might disagree with, but they're not just the soulless bureaucratic apparatchik like the other Democrats who are communists. And I was like, that's really something. He is that does get at something, right? Which is that, Bernie and AOC, they might be wrong, they might be right. At least they stand on principle. They're not just these politician, ruthless apparatchik type people who just want to guard their power and privileges. Right?
Yeah.
And, so communism, fuck, I mean, Jesus, capital C communism, yeah, that ship might have sailed. And anyway, communism's ancient. Communism, do we want to do like the disciples of Jesus and like vow of poverty type shit? Communism? No, fuck it. Socialism is modern, right? So socialism's more modern. It's 19th century, it's of the capitalist era. It's a new term. It's a new concept, society. Ancient communists didn't have a concept of society. They did not. They didn't have any reason to. We do. And so, but yeah, I mean, obviously people are turned off by that kind of stuff. I mean, in terms of left, right, and becoming right, I think the people who get disenchanted with the left, they throw the baby out with the bathwater, is what happens. And that's why it becomes like a drift to the right, right? Because suddenly, once you take the red pill, then you're like, oh, the right-wing people actually have some reasonable points. And of course they do. Of course the right-wing people have reasonable points. Otherwise it wouldn't be politically viable, right? They wouldn't be politically viable at all. I mean, yes, it's bullshit, right? And again, you don't have to be like a fascist, like a Nazi to be right-wing.
No, but the basic kinds of points that they have are going to be like, they have a monopoly on the most basic points, and then they just hide the rest of their agenda is like,
Well, even from themselves, meaning like, I like to point out, it's not like anyone is for capitalism. No one is for capitalism. Like if you come to anyone with the Marxist definition of capitalism, they would be like, yeah, that sounds fucked up.
100%.
Right? But they have another definition. No one's really pro-capitalist. That's a late thing. Nobody even accepted being called pro-capitalist. They were like, yeah, that's a Marxist term. We don't agree. We don't agree with the basic terms, right? So nobody's pro-capitalist. What they do is they ignore a lot of inconvenient realities as just imponderables, or you can't do anything about that. And obviously the Democrats do that, and even the Democratic Socialists, like the AOCs, whatever, they also feel that way. In other words, their definition of like the problem of capitalism is very limited. It's like profit seeking and, corruption and, irresponsibility that way.
But both sides would agree. Both sides would agree that a person should get the value of their work.
Yes, absolutely. Right. Exactly. Right. So the bourgeois ideology is there. And then the so-called pro-capitalist people are basically like, well, there's just these things we can't do anything about. Now, the problem is that the socialists, if they line up with the progressives, they might imagine, oh, there's a lot you can do about that, right? And you just hire more bureaucrats to do more research about racism, sexism, homophobia, and you just put them on the case, and you litigate it in court forever in some Kafkaesque nightmare, right? And we can do something about these things, or at least we can try, right? We can care. And it's like, yeah, that's a nightmare too. Now, so I would say that that's, the issue is the left should be strange. I'll invoke the Kolakowski again, which is the concept of the left remains unclear this day. And as it should, because it's not definable, it is a little bit of, he called it a mysterious consciousness of historical possibility, utopia, and that it's a negation of the status quo. It's basically saying we don't accept the status quo as permanent, whereas the right accepts more of the status quo as permanent, right? As something that you can't do anything about. So I just feel like, again, some assumptions, the left are the well-intentioned good people, the altruistic people, right? The moral social justice people. The right are the ruthless, amoral, individualist, selfish people. That's the assumption. We got to throw that out the window. We got to recognize that, generally speaking, you got to take ideology. Everyone thinks that they're doing what's right, what's for the best, what's going to produce the greatest good. I mean, obviously there are some people who are not, but still at the level of ideology critique, you got to take it as like real and as well-intentioned and not just abject lie, corruption. The basic stuff. Like, obviously in the realm of politics that we have today, there's a lot of just shameless lying and total manipulation and just insanity, right? But again, why are they doing it? If you ask them what their goals are, what their real understanding of things, and then you'll get at their real ideology. Like, I'm sure that they think they're serving a higher good, but then the discourse will not be about that. The discourse will be lying about their opponents and manipulating the public, right?
That's a perfect answer for now, I think. And so then I'll turn it over here to the Q&A portion of this. We've got about 12 minutes actually, guys. And so Sahil has officially caught up and is here as well. And so basically all of the people that are here, I'm not sure about Ray's actually, but everyone else has been through every one of the episodes of Capital Monday so far, has been really active in the comment sections and has been debating one another on various things. And so I think they're all pretty excited to get to talk to you. And so I'm going to kind of step back then and let you guys go. So I'm going to put it over here into how do I change things over here so that they'll see all of you guys. There we go. Gallery mode open. Rudy says he wants to defend the labor theory of nothing. All right.
Okay.
Sartrean. I'm going to be listening, and Theo, Nance, Stahil, one of you guys, I know all of you guys have questions, so take it away.
Okay, I have one right off the bat. If somebody else wants to go ahead. Thank you for the conversation and the talk, Chris. If you speak about the capitalist production, in Kapital, would you say that the process of valorization has this inherent tension that it kind of like it wants to take off all the time? Yeah, it wants to leave the value, the anchor point of labor behind, but it never can. It has to like dialectically revert back always to, in a sense, this is how I put it in the essay. So I want to put my cards on the table. Yeah. It has to act like, yes, I was there back there in the labor. That's where I was.
Yes.
And this, yeah.
That's right. So I would say that's important because, I mean, this is where it really gets a little bit trippy. And where I do owe like Moish Postone, but also like Adorno, some acknowledgement here, which is that freedom beyond capitalism, will be the realization of capital and not just its abolition. Meaning that us Homo sapiens, right, we're just these apes who are along for the ride of society. And for a long time, obviously, since the human revolution, we've been like these meme carriers or whatever you want to call it. And capital wants to transcend humanity. And it does, and it produces an inhuman result. But in that inhuman result is a possibility of freedom. And freedom of society, not freedom of humans, not freedom of Homo sapiens. And that's why you get like this weird stuff with like Nick Land or whatever. And, you know, maybe the point of the human is to produce the AI singularity and, you know, this kind of nihilism. And there is a misrecognition there. However, there's a recognition there too, right? There is a recognition there, meaning that beyond capitalism would be the realization and fulfillment of capital, as well as its transcendence and abolition and negation, right? And so that's where the dialectic becomes important, because in some ways we already have that in capitalism. We already do. And so that's where I feel like we're a little bit objectless, because Marx could say, oh, it's the workers' movement for socialism, it's the class struggle that's actually keeping capital tied back to its source in labor, and that's like part of the problem. Whereas today it seems like, oh, we're just letting capitalism rip and leaving the source in labor behind. And it's like, well, but we are and we aren't. In other words, it might appear that way, but also, can it really be that ever? Right. So I think one of the last speeches that Moishe Postone ever gave before he died, it was in Vienna. He said, well, the 20th century saw that what happens, the negative consequences of the destruction of the petite bourgeoisie, fascism. And now we're going to see the negative destructive consequences of the end of the proletariat. And I just thought, but that's not really possible. In other words, you can't really get rid of the proletariat the way you can get rid of the petite bourgeoisie. And anyway, you can't really get rid of the petite bourgeoisie either, because there are all sorts of levels of mediation that come back. And so you get a kind of new middle class always, right? So it's not like there's ever really a terminal point of the middle class. And there certainly is never a terminal point of the working class either. Right. So that's where a lot of kind of naive democracy comes in, where it's like, okay, and also kind of nationalism, where it's like, you know, is there a working class in Denmark anymore? Right. Or is the working class only in Bangladesh? Right. And so that's where one does have to, I mean, this is the really difficult part, but not so difficult, maybe. We have to think globally, politically. You know, we do have to think about organizing the working class globally. You know, and that is facilitated also by a lot of migration, right? It's like the late 19th century that way. I always like to point out that the working class was migratory in that period, the way it is now. And the steamships were going, and people were going back and forth, and there were Bolsheviks living in the United States before the revolution, right? And you know, so, and that facilitated, you read like a Claude McKay novel about like being West Indian and living in France and Marseille, right? There was an international working class, and they were socialists too, right? And so I think that's, you know, the other point. I don't think we're going to like fully sever. We can't in that sense, because it's, again, if we accept the Marxist definition of capitalism, that it's bourgeois social relations, contradiction with industrial forces of production, the contradiction goes both ways, right? They're mutually contradictory. They're also mutually constitutive in capitalism. They both keep each other going. And it's not like you take one side or the other. So the Nick Land problem is that it basically sides with the industrial forces of production, right? And it's like, and you know, then the romantic critique of capitalism sides with the bourgeois social relations. However, usually misunderstood as like the bourgeoisie, bougie. No, bourgeois meaning like your worker, right? The worker. You know, the worker as like the humanistic human being, the self-creating artisan type Renaissance person, right? That's your bourgeois social relations, right? There's no one so bourgeois as the workers themselves. And thank God for that. Right? Otherwise, we are going to be in this completely inhuman hellscape. I mean, we already are, but you know, not to romanticize the working class, but I think that there's something in our social relations that still humanizes us in a bourgeois sense, right? So I think that that's still with us, absolutely, and I think that that's right. right? That's the way to grasp capitalism, is in that contradiction. As it's constituted, but also how we're going to potentially transcend it. Both.
Yes.
Mhm.
If someone, I have a follow-up question or like a little explanation, because this is what I mean in the essay, because I used Žižekian Hegelianism to arrive at the point that in a certain way, in a very specific certain way, it is nothing in this relation with in this tension. There's I wrote that it's like King Midas, where it turns into ash in your hands. Yeah, you produce, but it's only for this CMC prime
It's the
relation.
movement.
Yes,
Capitalism's the movement. It's the movement itself. It's the self-moving substance that is subject.
yes,
And again, that's both a horror, but it's also the way we're going to transcend it. Right? So it's both, right? It is the blob, it is the singularity, it is the matrix, it is like the horror, but it's also the way, and as we know, Neo took the red pill, and it turned out even Morpheus didn't know how far the rabbit hole went, because it turned out their whole thing was part of the matrix. That's good. That's actually what makes those three movies Marxist. Right?
I think it's Marxist in the moment. The evil guy in the first movie is I think he's the most revolutionary guy,
Agent
but
Smith.
no, the other, like
Architect.
on
Oh
the
no.
ship, on the ship in the first movie, there is this guy who
Oh, who
goes to Smith.
turns on them.
Yeah,
Right?
Cypher.
Yes, Cypher.
He wants to eat a steak.
Yes, and this scene is, I think, the best in the whole movie, is when he explains, you can tell me all about that the Matrix is not real, but when I put it in my mouth, it still tastes good.
That's right. Yeah, he's the sort of he's the flip side to the kind of anarcho, like, romantic heroes, right? That's right.
But wait, but Rudy, why is that the most radical moment in the?
Because unlike the other guys, he understands what the Matrix is, and the other guys have to do this whole spiel. Neo has to die at the end to realize there are subjects in the Matrix. We cannot separate from the Matrix, but I think the
He
second
sees it
movie,
first. Yeah, he sees it
says it
first.
first.
Yeah,
Like,
but
if he
also,
was not a coward,
right.
like only individualistic, maybe he's more Stirner, he's like individualistically saying, okay.
Right, that's right. No, I mean, basically it comes down to the girl who is transcending the oracle and the architect, right? And because she makes rainbows or whatever, so we know that that's good. But the reconciliation of the human and the machine, and it is, in other words, I don't think it's the end of the story either. In other words, I've been watching, like, all these right-wing people don't immanentize the eschaton. Do you know this idea? Don't try to bring about the end of the world. And I get it, they're right about that. I don't think that, like, the struggle for socialism is supposed to be the eschaton. I don't think it's supposed to be the end of the world. I don't know why I went out of focus there.
Yeah, focus. The
yeah,
lemurs put you out of focus right when you said that. Yeah.
Right. So and now I need to come back into focus. I don't know how to make it come back into focus. It's like the camera gets whatever. Let me see if I can trick it.
Something happened for a second there, it looked like. What if you leaned really close to it and then backed off?
It's still not wanting me. I don't know what it's focusing on now.
When you're blurry, you look a lot like Adorno himself.
Oh, do I? That's because we're both Italian or something.
Could you point your finger at the camera like that meme, and then we're good?
Yeah, now it's like super close up. Why is it focused so close up? That's really strange. I don't know why. But anyway, so I would say that we have to be aware of the one-sided oppositions in capitalism. Right? It's not about taking a side. directly like that politically, especially in terms of the capitalist politics that are on offer.
All right. Well, we're here at the end of the segment, so if you want to hang out for a minute so a couple people could say things off the record,
other
or whatever,
questions. Yeah,
that'd be awesome. Yeah, but for the recorded portion, this is it. Any
okay.
closing thought that you would like to share on your way out?
Well, no, I mean, I'm very happy that in the Underground Theory book that you published my negative dialectic of Marxism, which is some little sort of little foray, little determination of something, which I think I chose that one to publish there with you guys just because I thought it's a nice little orientation or framing, something to keep in mind. Something to keep in mind. Since Rudy asked about the dialectical question. Yeah, so I'm very happy to have my short piece in that book, and that it's that essay in particular I think is helpful for these kinds of questions.
Cool. And I think we should probably make that available to people, even if you don't have the book, make it available on the site perhaps or something. We'll figure it out. But you can always pick it up at Theory Underground or on the website. But with that, or I meant on the website, the Theory Underground website, or on Amazon. But with that, thank you so much, Chris, for joining us. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Thanks. Cool.